So thank you all for joining. I know today we've got BreAnne's here, and we're going to be talking about the state of the industry for healthcare and life sciences IT. Just real quick, we've got some additional programming coming up. Next week, we're going to be doing accelerate operations and lower costs with high performance storage and VMware Cloud Foundation. So um, Tom Nagelmeyer is going to come in, and if you don't know Tom, Tom is absolutely awesome. He is up there in my top favorite people to work with, just because he's got a lot of good stories and is just a fantastic wealth of knowledge. And then coming up May 22nd, week after that, what's new with VMware Private AI Foundation with NVIDIA? Big hot topic. I know that not only is the private AI story something that a lot of folks are super curious about, but also sort of our relationship with NVIDIA and their foundation is an ongoing thing that's just growing like wildfire. It seems like that's really going to push us out into being forerunners of the category. And that's with Shobit Bhutani and Jake Augustine. I know we've had Shobit before, and he's also fantastic. So bring questions for that. Then coming up June 5th, VMware Private AI Foundation with the NVIDIA overview and demo variation on the theme. And that is going to be through our LinkedIn Live sessions. So that's not going to be a me hosted one. That's going to be Pete Fletcher. And he's going to have Justin Murray in for that one for another perspective on that. So you're going to get kind of a private AI and NVIDIA Foundation twofer on there. But that is not why we are here today. Today, we are here to talk to BreAnne. How you doing?
Hi, doing great. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm super excited to be able to chat with people. Um, I'm actually going to hold off on sharing my screen and my presentation until well, I'll prompt you when I'm ready to share some slides. But I figure, I'll let people look at us
Sure.
for the first few minutes.
No, and that's good
Um,
because I'm going to actually ask some questions about you. Like,
oh
tell us
yeah,
about
yeah.
what you do here with
Go ahead.
Broadcom. And I know you weren't always a Broadcom techie person. You've actually got kind of an interesting past as well. So let's talk a little bit about
Oh,
that.
thanks. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Right now, I'm the head of healthcare and life sciences for the BCF division here within VMware by Broadcom. And I'm working on our industry strategy and bringing together the different messaging pieces, the marketing pieces, all the various industry related workflows and thought leadership work from across the division. I've been with VMware for well, just over 2 years. I joined on Valentine's Day 2 years ago. And prior to the acquisition, I was building solutions for healthcare and life sciences. But you're right, I don't actually come from the IT world. So I'm probably very different from a lot of the folks, the other guests that you have on your podcast. I actually come from industry, and I was um, I was a commercial diplomat for the British Embassy for about 6 years. I was working as the UK's vice consul for healthcare and life sciences. And I was based in San Francisco at the British consulate that was there. And I joke with my family and my friends that I really should have been keeping a journal during the whole time I was working there, because there were some months where I would come home every day with, some wild story to share with my husband. Um, and I mean, I was working for the British government during some of our more interesting political years. I was about 6 months into the role when the UK held their referendum to leave the European Union. And so I was able to kind of observe and influence the rebuilding of their healthcare and life sciences regulatory environment leading up to Brexit. And I did a lot of contingency planning with companies based here in the US who had a major footprint in the UK. Um, and then as soon as we launched into, crisis mode when the pandemic hit, I was part of the British government's US network rapid response team. And so I worked with both the UK and the US governments to get PPE and ventilators manufactured and shipped to where they needed to go. We would get, a weekly list of the top supplies that were needed across the major systems, and we would find suppliers that could ship those items in mass quantities. And then I was also able to support both the UK's NHS and several major hospital systems here in the US with their sudden need to support these kind of larger scale telehealth programs and kind of fast track their digital health and innovation goals, um, and acted as kind of a headhunter for startups that were developing things like diagnostics and vaccines and therapeutics. So it was a wild time. I was on the negotiating team that negotiated the remdesivir supply to the UK. Um, and what was really unique and what I could have written a book about that would be relevant to industry is I got to see how healthcare and government and life sciences and the tech industry all came together for the sake of population health. Um, and a lot of shifts happened and are still happening. And that's kind of where my perspective comes from. So VMware brought me on board to kind of provide that bigger picture perspective. And so when we talk to customers, how do we elevate that conversation outside of IT ops and more into kind of the business outcomes side of things? And so that's the perspective that I bring. So as you can probably tell, this is not going to be a very technical discussion. I think you've already had several very brilliant technical webinars where people who are much smarter than me can talk about the ins and outs of VCF. So my plan is to kind of bring us up a few thousand feet and talk about why it matters in healthcare and life sciences, and ultimately, to us as patients,
Mhm.
because at the end of the day, we're all patients, right? We're all beneficiaries of these innovations. So that's how I like to view it.
No, for sure. And I don't think less or more smart is actually a fair comparison, because you definitely bring a wealth of knowledge with you, and that's I think probably sort of the best way to step off on that content is kind of talking about where we are today, and talking about those major shifts in healthcare delivery, the pandemic effect, and getting a little bit deeper into telehealth and sort of what became of that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I'll start with a basic state of the industry, some of the trends that we're seeing and tracking, and then I'll attempt to tie it back to VCF, in particular, why private cloud is important, an important option for this industry in particular. Um, and I know we have a couple polls that we'll pepper in here and there to so people keep an eye out for those.
Mhm.
Um, so, like I said, we're all patients, right? So I'm sure many of us are already very acutely aware of a lot of the major trends that have been happening around digital health and telehealth in general over the past several years. But I would say, though, like the digital transformation of healthcare has been happening for a long time. It's been evolving, although slowly, over the past couple of decades, and always at a very slow pace. And that's frustrated a lot of people. But there are various reasons for that. A lot of them are based on regulation and security requirements, and integration issues. And there's this joke that healthcare is the only place where you're still going to see pagers and fax machines still being used on a regular basis, and it's 100% true. And there are several reasons why that is. Um, but in a nutshell, big tech, all the tech companies, they've been viewing the healthcare industry as kind of the next frontier. And so while I was working for the British government, I was in the very privileged position, and still am in the very privileged position, of working in Silicon Valley, kind of at the heart of tech, at the heart of innovation. And I got to work with everyone from the big five, all the way down to all of the promising startup companies that were trying to get into the industry. And then at the same time, I was working with a lot of the leadership at the top healthcare systems in the US and with the UK's NHS to help them identify and test digital health solutions, because there are so many of them out there. I mean, it's a saturated market and it's hard to kind of cull through all the options out there to see what works. And one thing that I ran into time and time again was that a lot of tech companies were really designing solutions for problems that they didn't totally understand, like, and there was a very clear disconnect. So you can't design a solution without understanding how it will fit into the workflows of the people who are going to be using it. And at the same time, you can't design a solution without also understanding the IT ecosystem into which these solutions will need to integrate. And so there are two sides of this innovation coin. And because of this disconnect, you now see a number of companies, including clinicians at the design stage, to make sure that their solutions are fit for purpose, rather than continuing to contribute to this issue of burnout in healthcare workers. And one of the things that I love about working at VMware is that I get to look under the hood of how healthcare works. Um, and you need to have that infrastructure knowledge coupled with the outcomes knowledge to really be able to make an impact in this industry, because it's so incredibly complex. But one of the things that the pandemic did for all of us is prove that healthcare can actually move fast. Um, and I wouldn't go so far as to use, the whole Facebook mantra of, move fast and break things. Like, that doesn't work in healthcare. You don't want that to work in healthcare. Um, but we can move fast. And it actually made a lot of people very angry. Why can't we act this dedicated when it comes to other population health issues? Vaccines were developed in record time, despite a majority of the pharma companies having to shift to remote work. You had hospitals building out their own telehealth platforms and using more digital health tools. There was a massive shift to conducting decentralized clinical trials, which is really where a patient can participate without having to go into an actual hospital setting. Um, all the wearables and measurement devices, those could be shipped directly to a patient in their home. AI tools were used to triage patients, to keep them from having to come into an overburdened healthcare system or an overburdened hospital if they didn't have to. Um, and, all of these things were happening. And when I joined VMware, there was this aha moment for me when I learned that VMware had been working with all of these providers and pharma companies to make sure that they could make these hairpin turns and adjust their workflows. And so, now at the time, there was a very palpable sense of scramble, scramble to get your remote workers up and running at home and enable them to be as effective in the home as they would have been in a hospital setting. Scramble to meet the care needs of your patient population while managing a crisis, a health crisis. And this scramble meant pulling together, honestly, a hodgepodge of solutions. And that created this, or compounded the issue that already exists in healthcare, the issue of technical debt. And there was this really great article about technical debt in healthcare as a result of the pandemic, and like 78% of CIOs said that it had really exacerbated the problem for them. And we can touch on that later, but digital, when you fast forward to today, as things are kind of getting back to normal, you see things like digital health investment have slowed down. Telehealth, it's still being used across the board, but its usage has now declined. People are still opting now to go back into a hospital and have a face-to-face with their physician. Decentralized clinical trials, they're still very crucial, but they've become less of a focus. And you see this in the news just recently. I don't know if you may have seen, but both Optum and Walmart are both exiting the telehealth business now. I think Walmart is closing all of their, I think it's 51 different health centers, shutting down their virtual care services. Optum, who had really just launched their telehealth program in 2021, they're already shutting that down. But I don't think, it's not like it's signaling the end of telehealth by any means. It's just telling us that there needs to be a new integrated version of telehealth. So telehealth 2.0. But
And
and
I
I'm really
definitely see a lot of
sad.
those. I was
Yeah,
going to say, I definitely see a lot of cases where those tools, you talked about that scramble during the pandemic where everybody's like, okay, we have to get this together because now we have to, right? And kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
watching how VMware by Broadcom's at the time, VMware's integration into that was so prolific, and it seemed like as we were tracking everything from Johns Hopkins University and that relationship with tracking the variants, and even
yeah.
on a broader scale, looking at some of the AI modeling that was happening on at a genome level for the vaccination development. There's so much technology embedded in that, and so when you're talking
Mhm.
about telehealth at a more topical human level. I don't see those tools going away. I think now that we have them and now that we've used them, I do see like that there will be a time when they reemerge in sort of a more practical application level as we sort of change our behaviors as patients. The baseline of us
Yeah,
as patients here, right?
I agree. I mean, I still prefer the use of something like telehealth if I have a question, if my 4-year-old son is sick and I don't want to take him into a hospital, I can have a virtual visit. There's definitely still a case to be made for how important it is. And it's like we went from a pendulum swinging from one extreme to the other, and now we're going to find that normalized, that place in the middle where we figure out what works best and how we can make things work for the betterment of population health. Um, and it has a big role to play in health equity too, and access to care. And that's kind of why I was really sad about the Walmart case, is because I think Walmart and that business model was filling a gap in access to care for a lot of underserved communities. So many people in rural America don't live within a reasonable distance of a hospital. So, but perhaps they live by a Walmart, most likely. So, that was able to act as kind of this important care provider for those populations. So, similarly
Absolutely.
with telehealth, it's very important to have that as an option for folks.
And I've seen that
But
firsthand. And at some point in time, I would love to just go on a rant about accessibility, particularly
yeah,
on two levels. Accessibility at the urban level for underserved communities, but also in the rural communities. And you know, my family's from Roswell, New Mexico, and I can tell you what the big hospital in Roswell, New Mexico looks like compared to what we're used to. It's in Silicon Valley when we're so close to Stanford, and
yeah,
there is a disparate level of service there, not to fault of anyone other than just the financial backing, the volume, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a place where that telehealth can absolutely get put into practical application. I think there is definitely sort of an enablement level where because it is such an innovative step, getting the public used to it, I think is something that will help serve that a lot better in its practical application.
yeah, absolutely. And this is just one of the many issues that the pandemic brought to the forefront, right? Is that access issue and identifying very clearly where those communities are, and so we now have so much data to show the importance of these types of technologies. Um, and some of the other issues that I think it really brought to light were things like also physician burnout, staffing shortages, the administrative burden. I mean, all of these things were present before, but it took the pandemic to bring those issues into the headlines. So I'm sure we all were seeing pictures of, doctors sitting in the hallway, crouched with their hands in their heads, just completely overwhelmed. There was a massive exit of staff, and we're still seeing a lot of hospitals shutting down. There was like some 30% of rural hospitals are at risk of closing over the next 5 to 10 years. And a lot of it has to do with, they don't have enough staff to really support the care, and they're operating on razor thin margins. So today a lot of the solutions that we're seeing being implemented into healthcare are ultimately trying to solve those systemic issues. Um, And then kind of going back to digital health and this telehealth, I would call it a revolution. Ultimately, I think came with three things. It came with, this hope for improved efficiency and improving patient outcomes. Um, it showed us what the interoperability challenges were, and it also came with this explosion of health data. And you now have all of these digital endpoints generating data on patients. And healthcare in general is now responsible, believe it or not, for a third of global data generation. And it's the fastest growth of any industry, including finance and manufacturing. I don't know, I think astronomy fits up there somewhere as well, mapping the stars. But you know, so now we have to deal with all of this data. What do we do with it? How do we store it? How do we analyze it? So that's kind of creating a new balloon effect. Um, and another one of the trends that's contributing to this explosion of data is genomics and personalized medicine. And so, it can get a bit confusing when we talk about things like genomics versus genetics. Um, Genetics, basic example of that would be 23andMe. Have you done one of those tests, Anders?
Absolutely, and the results were a little bit shocking because, of course, your great great grandmother tells you, oh yeah, you're half Swiss, half Dutch, and 14% Danish, and then you get the results, and you're like, nope,
Yeah.
I'm 75% Swedish, which is
Oh my
somehow 35% Swedish, more Swedish than most Swedes. Figure that one out. But yeah, they're a little interesting.
How interesting.
And
So, can you disclose what percent Neanderthal you are?
yeah, no, right, exactly, exactly. And of course, then there's all the people who in Finland who tested and discovered. I don't think there's anybody in Finland who's not related to Genghis Khan somehow. But
Oh
there's
gosh,
another
right?
funny story about that. But yeah, that's.
Oh my goodness. Oh yeah, I mean it's fun stuff, right? And so I think that's kind of how a lot of people are engaging with genetics. So I don't know if you know this, but 23andMe, aside from the ancestry side of things, they also have a health insights program subscription. So you can have your DNA analyzed, and they can tell you if you have any kind of predisposition for different types of diseases or conditions. So you can see if you have genetic biomarkers for things, like breast cancer or Parkinson's or late onset Alzheimer's. Um, and so people can use that as a way to manage their health. And, they've got uh, genetic counselors who can work with you to understand those results. So that's one side of the coin. But genomics, that is looking at a person's entire set of genes and how they interact with each other and their environment. And so this feeds into the area of personalized medicine that's growing really quickly. So now we can anticipate how an individual will respond to a certain therapeutic by studying their genome. We can design therapies for each individual patient based on their genome. We can even edit their genome. I don't know if you've heard of CRISPR-Cas9, but it's this gene editing technology, and I won't go into how it works, but we can essentially take, for instance, a blood sample. We can sequence the genome off of that blood sample to identify a particular region that would be responsible for a specific cancer, say, and then edit that part of the genome and then transfer it back into the body where it can and replicate, um, and kind of attack the issue from the source. And so a number of life sciences companies are developing cell and gene therapies that are meant to be tailored to individuals, and target that underlying cause of disease. And what this does is it ultimately brings the manufacturing process closer to the patient and sometimes even in the hospital itself. And so, at the bedside, you take a sample of blood or tumor tissue, take it to an on-site lab, sequence the genome and find variations, and then use that information to generate a therapy. And so an example of hospitals that are doing this, you've got, St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, you've got Great Ormond Street Hospital in the UK. Those they've both built manufacturing suites on site that are producing gene modified cell therapies for patients. Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, they also have a center for cell engineering. And then, most of the top pharma companies are getting involved. I think there's a group, an alliance that's been formed by a number of top pharma companies like AbbVie and Amgen, Bayer, Merck, GSK. I think Novo Nordisk is in there as well. But they're going to be co-funding a whole genome sequencing of about 250,000 DNA samples. And they're going to use that information for drug discovery and therapeutic development. And we see this working really well with the treatment of what's called orphan diseases or rare diseases, where you have a smaller population of patients who are suffering from these things. And so we're able to then go in and tailor things to those smaller patient populations. And so when I circle that back to the data piece, genomics, it's considered a big data field at this point because of how much data it generates. It requires a tremendous amount of compute power and storage just to read and store and transmit the raw data. And I think the data from a single human genome generates about 200 gigabytes, just the raw data. And so we're going to expect to see and need about 40 exabytes of data to store the genome sequence of sequencing data that's been generated through to about 2025. And if you compare that to other things, like, for example, 5 exabytes could store all of the words ever spoken by human beings. Like, that's how big this is. And, compression can help with a lot of that, but that's just the raw data we're talking about. You also have to analyze that data if it's going to be of any use. And that analysis generates at least an additional 100 gigabytes of data per genome. So you can see how this kind of quickly balloons as personalized medicine starts to become more mainstream.
That's massive. And you're
Yeah.
talking about sort of doing that genome mapping. I haven't had this in a human medicine realm, but I actually had a dog that had cancer, and he had a spindle cell carcinoma, and they actually asked. They said, "Hey, we're doing this project where we're genome mapping on canines who are also doing the 23andMe now because." Silicon Valley or whatever, but and
Yeah.
map his specific treatment with his genomes against that specific type of spindle cell carcinoma times the number of types of treatments that they did for him for that type of cancer. So now take
Huh.
that information, that specific genetic information for him, and that specific information on the cancer times 5 each. So now we're talking,
Yeah.
a massive amount of data just for this one case times everybody
Oh
on
my
earth with
gosh.
every possible treatment with every possible malady. Staggering amount of data. Staggering amount of data.
Yeah, it's crazy. So that begs the question, where do you do this, right? How do you
Mhm.
it has this compute problem. And so, a lot of companies who are involved in this, they tend to start in the public cloud. So I'm going to tie this back to VCF here. Um, so they do this to start, to store and analyze the data because they don't want to duplicate data sets, and then that just creates a bigger problem. But then they're finding that it's inexpensive to start in the cloud, but it quickly becomes way too expensive to scale up in the public cloud. And so, you have a lot of customers who are doing this and they're saying, listen, we need to shift to something different because this isn't working. And so we have folks going into private cloud or hybrid model to kind of get those costs under control. And then you also have the issue of privacy and data safety because you're dealing with people's, genetic information, and that can be weaponized if you think about it. So it's really extremely important. And so a lot of companies are looking at private cloud as being the safer option. And so we're seeing that as a specific use case and reason to kind of shift onto a private cloud platform. And then I just have one more trend that I'll talk about just so we can get to some of the juicy
Sure.
stuff.
And we've got a
Um,
couple of questions in here too, and then we
oh,
can
wow, great.
yeah, good ones.
Okay, good. So the last trend that I'll talk about in healthcare is this shift to value-based care, which refers to kind of focusing more on the quality of care and the patient experience. And it also refers to kind of a system where reimbursement, um, the system of reimbursement that ties payments for care delivery more to the quality of care rather than the simple kind of fee for service model that we typically see in healthcare. And payers are also adopting these models of accountable care. Um, and in a nutshell, I would say that value-based care has what's called the triple aim, which is to provide better care for patients, to improve population health management, and to lower healthcare costs, which all sounds great. But unlike a traditional model of value-based care is really driven by data because providers need to report to payers on very specific metrics and demonstrate improvements on those metrics. So they might have to track and report on things like hospital readmissions, adverse events, things like population health and patient engagement, um, most likely a number of financial metrics as well. And so under the new models, providers are incentivized to use evidence-based medicine and engage patients, upgrade their health IT, and use things like data analytics to get paid for their services. And to the point about upgrading the health IT, this shift to value-based care really means shifting to a more patient-centric approach and monitoring the patient across the continuum of treatment, say across various inpatient sites and outpatient sites and therapy centers. So the data is no longer being kept hospital by hospital or by department, but now by patient. So you then need more kind of coordinated care across physicians. Like when a patient sees a primary care physician or perhaps a few specialized providers, that person's medical data needs to be shared and the care needs to be synchronized in order to be efficient and effective. And so this synchronization would need to happen across like all data fields, like labs and diagnostics and different hospitals. And it would have to include, different types of notes and pictures and prescriptions for each patient. Workflows and dashboards, and then things like organizational efficiencies need to be ironed out. Dashboards to maintain and measure all of the massive volumes of data that are generated by each provider. Those all need to be taken into consideration. Um, and then on top of all that, you have, this regulatory framework that you have to operate within. And so, much of the digital transformation that we're seeing in healthcare is kind of leaning towards that goal of value-based care, and it's a huge undertaking. Um, so I think it's a good time to get our first poll out there. What do you think? I'd love to see uh, the first poll
Yeah,
is
let's do this.
is
I'll go ahead and
about
launch this, and we can touch on some of these questions while the poll is running. So I've got
mm,
here you go. So where do you think healthcare CIOs are prioritizing their budgets this year? So we'll launch the poll and give this a couple of minutes. And while folks are doing that, one of the questions is, did you get to meet the Queen?
I love that. No, I didn't get to meet the Queen before she passed.
I know.
But I did get invited to her home though. I was invited to speak at her home at Windsor Castle. And I gave a presentation there and I was invited to be a guest, an overnight guest,
Ooh,
along with a few other folks who were part of this visitation program. So yeah, I got to spend the night at Windsor Castle and I was keeping an eye out for the Queen. I was like, oh, at least let me see a corgi or two, like I would be
Right, right.
happy with that.
Queen or a
Um,
corgi? I think those are equal weight on
yeah,
awesome, right?
queen or corgi. I grew up with the corgis, so I secretly really wanted to see the corgis.
Awesome.
Um, but yeah, so I got close. I got close, but it was amazing to wake up in the morning and have free run of Windsor Castle, minus the Queen's, private quarters, of course. But
Sure.
yeah, it was incredible. Yeah,
Super
good
special
question.
experience. Alrighty. Looks like
Absolutely.
we're at about 41% voted here, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll.
Great.
So let's talk about
Okay.
results here.
Yeah, well,
Ooh,
I'll share my screen now because I have some statistics that I'll bring up to support this here.
so internally,
Uh,
we've got two two big piles of answers. The number one result was in cybersecurity tools with 86%. See
huh,
that as being the priority. And then number two with 14% was interoperability technologies. So nothing in patient engagement, nothing in clinician productivity, and nothing in data analytics. So those are some interesting results.
very interesting. Okay, so I mean, people are not far off. Cybersecurity, I can totally understand that. People obviously are following the news these days. So this, what I have up here is a Gartner report. So this shares kind of the top healthcare priorities by investment area. Um, and the first one is they're prioritizing data analysis, which really speaks to the point made earlier about data in healthcare. We've got so many ways to collect data, but it's how we analyze it that will make the big difference in managing population health. Um, and then, yeah, number two is cybersecurity tools, which, yeah, it's no surprise considering all the onslaught of attacks that we've been seeing over the past few years. Um, I think last year alone, there was like over 700 data breaches in healthcare. Um, and then, of course, if you follow the news, you probably have heard about Change Healthcare's recent attack in February. Have you heard of that, Anders? Yeah,
No, I didn't hear about that. Yeah, that's
uh, so it's pretty sad. So if you follow the news, or if you don't, Change Healthcare, they're a subsidiary of United Health, and they're one of the largest health payment processing companies in the world. And they were the victims of a ransomware attack in February, and that resulted in about one third of Americans' sensitive health data being leaked to the dark web.
wow.
So yeah,
That's
yeah,
serious.
it's super serious. And apparently the breach, I think they just came out with this a couple of days ago. They found that the breach was caused by a lack of multi-factor authentication. And what happened was they ended up stealing the credentials of an employee's Citrix credentials. They were stolen through malware, and then they were able to infiltrate the system that way. But yeah, I mean, there are so many other stories like that, but that's definitely the biggest one we've seen in a while because it affected the entire U.S. healthcare system for the most part. Um, so then let's see, number three next on the list of priorities is patient engagement technology, which speaks to, this shift towards value-based care and improving both the patient experience and the provider's workflows. And then if you kind of look a bit further down, you might be surprised to see that AI is so far down on the list. Um, but honestly, I would say that AI kind of fits across all of these categories. Honestly, like there's an app or a software, AI software or algorithm that could fit very cleanly into all of these and impact all of these. Um,
Hmm.
but this represents a very wide range of organizations.
And we actually have a
Is
question
this
about that. One of the questions
uh,
that came in was, what opportunities do you see for generative AI in healthcare and life sciences? And I, there's
mm,
a lot, right?
there's a lot. There's a lot. Um, I mean, so last year when generative AI kind of exploded onto the scene, I hosted a Jeffersonian style dinner at the residence of the UK's tech envoy to the US. Um, Jeffersonian style means you've only got like maybe maximum 14 people around a table. And I really wanted to talk about generative AI in healthcare and where they see the opportunities being. And, we had leadership from local healthcare providers, we had government represented, we had some of the big tech leaders, we had a couple startups represented, and some of the large VCs in Silicon Valley were also there. And we were all kind of sharing our perspective on this, and it was agreed that kind of the holy grail of Gen AI in healthcare is to be able to use it for diagnostics. Um, but we're a long ways away from that, honestly. There are a lot of things that need to be put in place. Regulation needs to be clearly in place for this. Um, Physicians' attitudes towards using generative AI, needs to be there needs to be a shift there for them to be able to trust it and use it. So it's a really complex issue, but ultimately using it for diagnostics would be the best. And then in life sciences, um, you'd be looking at drug discovery for the most part, and they're already testing generative AI in identifying drug candidates. Um, and they've assembled, like what's happened now, it's kind of crazy. Gen AI has identified a therapeutic, and they are bringing that therapeutic all the way through to the clinical trial phase now. So in the future, we will likely have drugs, have therapies that were designed by Gen AI, based off of genomic data, perhaps, or um, and so it's really exciting, and that in and of itself would really decrease the time it takes to get drugs to market. So that's pretty exciting because right now it takes a really long time. But one of the things, uh, Anders, that was interesting about this dinner, my goal was really to kind of gather this diverse group of people around the table from industry. And while we were all sharing our perspectives, we had this realization like, we're all coming from the Silicon Valley perspective. And, where our institutions are well funded, we have the ability to build and test these innovations and these ideas in healthcare. But that's not the reality for most organizations across the country, right? Like that's a lot of healthcare organizations are operating on razor thin margins, like we said before, and just trying to keep the lights on. So, what are the opportunities for Gen AI or AI just in general, to support some of those healthcare organizations, with just their basic operations? But yeah, that actually leads me into my next slide very nicely. So thank you for that question. Um, so to that point, I would say that, no matter where you are across the country, no matter the state of your healthcare system, all providers essentially have the same basic goals, which you'll see at the top here. You have um, improving patient outcomes, reducing costs, and adopting innovations. And then you can see under each category, there are some examples of areas that feed into that goal. So for example, under improving patient outcomes, they might be doing that by trying to improve their care coordination, or improving their clinical quality and safety, or improving the patient experience. Under reducing costs, you might be looking at how you can do that by improving some of your operational efficiencies or improving your revenue cycle management. Um, but when it comes to adopting innovations, most hospitals are pretty well underway with their digital health and telemedicine strategies. And they're now looking at opportunities for things like generative AI. And my team and I, we've had several conversations with hospitals that are looking to build kind of the smart hospital, or the hospital of the future, however you want to coin it. And they're looking for partners to kind of support their foundation for this, which brings me to this concept of foundation. So under all of these goals and levers, you have very basic elements. AI and ML, they can fit under all of these. all of these rely heavily on the integrity and the interoperability of your data. They all have, modern applications, and of course, security is a must-have under all of this. And then you see VMware's Cloud Foundation is really what supports a hospital system's ability to implement these innovations and meet these goals and remain agile and control costs while they're trying to do all of this. And I think that might be a good time to get the next poll up, kind of talking a bit about AI. I mean, I'll look at it briefly. I'll talk about it very briefly, but I don't want to spend too much time on it because I know, you guys have a couple of AI related sessions, including, I think, a healthcare AI session at some point in June.
Hmm.
But maybe leading into that, this poll would be interesting for us to kind of gather some observations off of in preparation for that.
For sure. And just for capturing for the recording, the poll is, where do you see AI being utilized most often in healthcare? And looping back to that genome thing, and you might actually remember the name of the company, and I'm sorry I can't recall it off the top of my head, but I heard that there was a company in Canada that was actually looking at doing generative AI models of human genomes to actually compare against to compare data against, to say, okay, look, these aren't actual people, but these are possible human genomes that could exist, and then let's bounce
Yeah.
XYZ treatment off them in theory. And that, thinking about the amount of time that that's going to save, and it's always going to be that time versus money versus raw data storage paradigm.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we'll
I mean,
get
that's
there.
huge.
We'll get
That's
there.
there's a term for that. It's called digital twins, which is just
Hmm,
another way of saying creating a model of something. So yeah, creating a digital twin of a patient and then testing different scenarios on that patient based off of their genome. Yeah, it's so exciting. It's really interesting. I mean, I think about what the healthcare system will look like for my children when they grow up to be my age.
for sure. And
Hopefully,
you blink.
yeah,
I mean, thinking about when I was 6 and I went for my first big trip to the hospital for my shots and what we were doing in healthcare in my
yeah.
lifetime, versus where we are today. It's just apples and oranges.
Oh,
All righty.
100%.
So let's take a look at these
So where are we?
results. So 60% says clinical documentation, 20% imaging, 20% remote patient monitoring, and nobody for drug discovery, patient triage, and chatbots.
Hmm. Yeah, clinical documentation is a great one. I mean, there is no right or wrong answer here. I
Sure,
think
sure.
everyone who's listening has their own experience and have been seeing AI being implemented, perhaps at their own hospital systems. So what I've been seeing more recently, just because of the work that I've been involved in over the past couple of years, is that AI is being used a lot in imaging at the moment. Radiology is one of the top revenue generators for any hospital system, and it touches nearly every disease area within a hospital. So it's really a prime area for innovation. Um, and it's going to have a huge AI is going to have a huge impact on diagnostic radiology in particular. And not to scare anyone, but that's kind of a ticking time bomb right now. Like they're facing this crazy attrition, and they've got, I think, over half of the diagnostic radiologists in the US are going to be retiring in the next 10 years, over half. But then you contrast that with, the aging population and the number of baby boomers that are reaching an age where they're going to be needing a lot of imaging. And so hospitals are looking at AI as one of the tools they can use to help augment those, you know, the staff that they have now, augment the workflows and kind of help with increasing their throughput and get through as many patient cases as they can. And then also to improve accuracy, which is, should be great. But I think that really speaks to, it's pretty representative of how AI is being viewed across all the various different lines of business. Remote patient monitoring is another great one. Um, Natural language processing for healthcare documentation is a great one, but they all do point towards improving workflows and efficiencies. So I'm going to very quickly, I know we've only got 8 minutes left. Oh my goodness. So I want to talk about what this means for VCF and how we're making an impact against the backdrop of these major trends in healthcare.
Mhm. And that was one of our
And
last questions. I know we touched on it a little bit
yeah.
earlier, but can we address the issue of technical debt in healthcare and how does
Mm.
VCF help? And I know we've been sort of flirting with that for the last hour, but that's
Yeah, I know. Well, so, you often hear about VMware and companies like us being referred to as the plumbing, which I'm sorry, it's literally the least sexy way to describe anything. And so I like to shift that view from being plumbing to, you know, uh, instead being, a hot bath on a cold night. Like, what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve? And so cloud platforms, whether they're, private or public, they're really foundations. And if you live in California, like me, like us, I don't know about you, Anders, but most of us don't really stress about earthquakes because you know that the infrastructure has been designed to withstand some of the more intense quakes. And so I view VCF like a structural retrofit, right? So like you're ready for all of those high magnitude events. Um, Retrofitting is not always cheap to do upfront, but you consider the long-term safety and livability of your structure, and what it would cost to have, your house slide off of its foundation or sustain, some serious structural damage. Um, so let me take a look at, the benefits of the full stack of private cloud in healthcare. So data privacy is always top of mind for anyone who touches or owns patient data. So our private cloud has really robust privacy controls to better manage the use and storage of patient data. Data security, as we've mentioned, is in the headlines quite often, and our very unique recovery features ensure operational uptime, which is really crucial for life-saving systems and applications. And then moving to the right-hand side, as I mentioned before, there are massive volumes of data that are being generated by the modernization of healthcare. And so things like medical imaging and genomic sequencing, those are all requiring high performance computing capabilities, not just to store the data, but again, to analyze it. We've got low latency, which is crucial for areas like telemedicine and patient monitoring, where any lag in the speed or quality of transmission can have really broad reaching downstream impacts to the patient. And then last but not least is the ability to predict and manage costs. So you've got the private cloud's variable cost structure can really make it difficult to budget your IT infrastructure expenses over time. Um, and then not to mention the out of control costs associated with scaling up several data heavy workloads like genomic sequencing that perhaps, a research hospital or life sciences company might be looking to do. Um, the next slide is very text heavy, so I apologize. I'm just going to essentially read the headlines. These are our top 4 use cases that we've summarized. There are so many more than these though, but in a nutshell, we're helping organizations with driving their patient engagement with digital care at the edge, getting a handle on all that data. We're helping them modernize and cloud enable their health IT systems and apps, safeguarding your patient data, and ensuring your business continuity, and optimizing those clinical workflows and patient outcomes, really speaking to all of those goals that healthcare leadership are looking to accommodate. And when we look at some of our current customers who are utilizing this, there are some very clear trends. You've got automation features that have been really valuable to the IT teams. For some research hospitals, they've seen faster time to some of those big data insights and research discoveries. One organization said they saw great scalability, allowing them to onboard new scientific projects in hours rather than days, which is huge. Um, Automation made it much easier and less time consuming for the IT team to manage. And then one of our big pharma companies, customers said that VCF enabled them to have a single, integrated, and secure infrastructure. It's simplified management, standardized the IT architecture for us, and helped with optimizing performance, amplified storage, and networking tools. And to your point, to the question about technical debt, I mean, all of these things support with lessening that technical debt, and which can be a huge burden. I think, a lot of CIOs and CTOs and tech leaders view technical debt as kind of a major hindrance to their ability to innovate. So VCF, it creates this standardized infrastructure, that really allows you to reduce the complexity of managing your infrastructure silos and your legacy systems. So you essentially have better visibility um, of all of the different software programs that you have running from the very beginning. And from a hardware perspective, instead of managing all these separate servers for different applications, VCF allows organizations to run multiple virtual machines on a single physical server, and streamlining the infrastructure management and reducing any technical debt that might be associated with things like manual tasks, um, aging hardware, maintenance, all of those things. Um, and then going back again to the automation, the automated lifecycle management feature is really helpful when you're looking to reduce technical debt that you might have with some of those routine tasks. So, I mean, essentially, every aspect of VCF in some way can support with reducing that for a healthcare customer. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, super good. And and that's one of those things where it's always going to be tip of the iceberg. I mean, we could almost schedule a session of its own just to discuss that topic, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I mean, all of this is tip of the iceberg. There's so many ways that we can make an impact. And
Hmm.
life sciences is its own industry. I know I touched on genomics very briefly in relation to life sciences, but there are tons of opportunities there as well. So yeah, we could always do another series on that
Yeah,
if people are
I would
interested.
absolutely love it. Yeah, absolutely. If you'd be willing to come back. I mean, I know that there's been a lot of really good engagement today and a lot of super fascinating topics. We tend to get so into the weeds with the technical how-tos that a lot of time we really lose an index on the practical application. And this has been a fantastic example of that practical application today.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's been wonderful. I'm glad. I know it's kind of why I'm here is to put some color around what we're doing, I think. Bring it back to
I
the why.
definitely dig it. Well, we are just about at time, and that just flew by. What were we saying earlier?
I
We're
know.
gonna blink and it's gone, right? And here we are. So thank you so much again for coming in today and sharing with us. And yeah, we will definitely try to get you back on the schedule, and we can double click on this some more because I know there's going to be a lot of questions. This session was recorded, so we will get the recording out to everybody who didn't make it. We'll socialize that out, and it'll be available there. So, any parting thoughts before we hit the road?
No, just thank you again. And, I really look forward to any engagement that comes off of the back of this. If you're in VMware and you, VMware by Broadcom, and you want to reach out, I'm available to support with any trainings or conversations or even client work. So use me for sure.
Awesome, fantastic. Well, thank you so much. We'll catch up again soon, and everyone else, we'll
All
see you
right.
next week. Take care.
Thanks, Anders.
Bye bye.